If you're kind of like single-handedly bring back species from like the brink of like local extinction to being sort of almost commonplace again, that's what keeps them going, really, because you see immediately like that you do something the next year, you can already like see some of the work paying off.
Welcome back to the Cities Reimagined podcast. I'm your voice of choice, Johannes Riegler, and this is Reimagining Urban Wildlife Habitats. I'm very happy to have Gerfried Ambrosch on the show today. Gerfried and I go back a long time, and we probably met in the early 2000s when I organized a show or two for one of Gerfried's bands who played in the sleepy town of Klagenfurt back then, and we might come back to that later. But today we talk about his work on creating habitats for urban wildlife, especially for amphibians. Gerfried has a PhD in literature and cultural studies, which he gained with his work, The Poetry of Punk, which is out on Routledge. And I really encourage you to check that out if you're also just remotely into alternative music. You find the link in the description. We could easily do a show on this line of his work, and maybe we should at some point. There is actually a bonus episode coming up to this episode where we discuss parts of his experiences of touring countries which you usually do not tour as a punk band, like Belarus. So maybe you want to check that out. But today we talk about enhancing and safeguarding the habitats of endangered frogs and toad populations, for which he also won a biodiversity award last year. Gerfried nowadays lives in Munich, Germany, but when visiting Vienna on a nice late summer weekend in September 2003, he took me out on a bike ride through the city to show me the habitats he was working on and where he found endangered species, and discussed with me what kind of urban interventions would help to improve the living conditions of toads, frogs, and other amphibians. So this was the basis for the conversation you're about to hear today. Biodiversity has been one of my personal favorite topics over the last years and months. So it was really good to have this conversation with Gerfried and get his opinion and his perspectives in, and also to see when he took me out on this bike ride, also to see how to see the city with a toad's eye. How do toads and frogs perceive the city, and how do they go around, and what is important for them to flourish? But why is that relevant for reimagining cities? The prime focus is at the moment on the climate collapse, and other crises caused by human activities are often overlooked. And one of the most significant one is the biodiversity crisis. So we are in a time of a global emergency with an alarming decline in the biodiversity and the abundance of species across the planet. So some scientists have called that the sixth mass extinction, which is in contrast to previous extinctions human-made. This mass extinction of species is a big problem because it messes up how ecosystems work, reduces the variety of life on Earth, and puts our planet's systems at risk. The reasons for this crisis are primarily driven by human activities such as deforestation, habitat destruction, urban sprawl, overexploration of natural resources, pollution, and climate change. Toads and frogs and other amphibians are an indicator for local biodiversity and ecosystem health. But they are increasingly threatened by forms of urbanization, which do not take natural processes and a balanced human-nature connection into account. And the result of these urbanization processes are a loss of habitats due to the destruction of wetlands, leftover spaces, freshwater bodies, and so on. And the fragmentation of habitats and how habitats are cut off from each other by construction, roads, sealed soil, and so on. They suffer from pollution, from foreign species introduction by humans, and by traffic mortality. There is also an abundance of scientific evidence that it is time to act. But what is lacking at the moment is action. But there's also hope on the horizon, because just this week, the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the European Council concluded the eagerly awaited nature restoration law. And this law will require member states to implement measures to restore nature on at least 20% of the European Union's land and marines area by 2030, and all ecosystems in need restoration by 2050. While these are very, or I would say extremely relevant measures on a European and national scale, there are also so many small-scale projects and inspiring people who aim to turn the wheel around. And one of them is Gerfried Ambrosch, and you will hear all about that in today's show. Before you ask yourself where the disturbing frog sounds come from, I'm not recording this in the swamp, and also there's no toad sitting on my desk. It's just field recordings from the internet. But with no further ado, here is the conversation I had with Gerfried Ambrosch. Enjoy. Good morning, Gerfried. How are things? How are things in Munich on this Sunday morning?
Very slow. Just digesting my breakfast, having coffee.
Yeah,
it's all good. It's very sunny. It's nice.
Right. Here in Vienna, it's not sunny. It's cloudy, but that's all right. Gerfried, it's so nice to have you on the show. I'm very happy that we continue this talk we had the other day on a bike tour on urban habitats for amphibians, I would call it. I think that was if you would sum up the bike tour we did into one title, I think that would be the title. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that would be my main focus when it comes to, sort of urban wildlife, because that's what I know most about. So I guess, yeah, it's a good title. And thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, cool. Great to have you. So you do not have a background in natural science. How come that you developed this strong interest in amphibians?
Well, I mean, that just started very, very early, as a kid, as a child, really. I think I dug my first pond, or had my dad dig my first pond when I was maybe 5 or 6. And it's just fascinated me ever since. And so in recent years, what happened was that I just, started to pay more attention to, things that, affect amphibians, and I read a lot, about their current state of endangerment and things like that. And I found it's just really shocking to see how the populations have plummeted, around Europe. There's a number of reasons for that, and most of them are man-made, of course. So I figured, well, having my background in DIY punk, I was like, okay, well, why wait for big institutions or whatever to do things, which is an important part of the solution, of course, but as an ordinary citizen, there's so much you can do. And so I just started to go out and with a shovel and start to dig ponds, connect with people that did the same. There's grassroots organizations that I'm involved with that do that. And so it's just, and then once you start and once you sort of like, you just learn more and more about it. And the more you learn, the more you kind of want to do to, prevent certain species that, you love from going extinct.
That's so nice. And I really like that. It already seems now that this DIY punk rock background comes back on the show from time to time. So I find that very interesting that the people involved in that scene somehow have an urge also to change things outside of the scene, if you will. But coming back to toads and frogs,
Right.
I know that you have
and newts.
Yeah.
Well, it's just just to be
holistic. Okay.
Not to exclude anyone. Well, now we're excluding salamanders, but of course.
Okay.
All of them, but mostly frogs and toads. Yeah, you're right.
All right. I know that you've been active in preserving and improving habitats for amphibians in the suburb of Graz, in Austria, in Vienna, and now you work also in Munich. And I remember pictures where you stood knee deep in mud, and containers of tadpoles were just on the kitchen counter in your apartment. And I believe your partner Anna was not very amused about that. But can you tell us a little bit more about your work and what you do, and how it does this preservation or rehabilitation work? What do you do?
Well, yeah, I mean, you were right. Sort of restoring, like preserving and restoring like habitats that are either on the brink of vanishing or have already vanished, because still very common, because usually like spawning grounds for amphibians, like small ponds and very small bodies of water, they're of no use to humans usually. Like in agriculture, they're just in the way, so people just basically fill them up with soil and they disappear. And that's been going on for the past 100 years, but of course, especially since World War II. And so as a result, there's just not enough, water to go around, really, for amphibians to spawn in, like small bodies of water that ideally are fish free and things like that. So just, down to like small puddles, that are just out there. So it's a very hands-on approach where, you just literally just go out and like dig a hole and fill it up with water. I mean, that's just the basic gist of it. Of course, there's more to it, because depending on the soil, you need like a pond liner that you use, and things like that. And it's quite easy, but it's also costly. So what I've done is, when I sort of like identified spots where it would be useful, like for biodiversity and all that, to create something like that, like to basically dig a pond and things like that. I would first, of course, you need permission by whoever owns that plot of land. Sometimes it's just a local municipality. Sometimes it's like a farmer or whatnot. And then you need to acquire like some money for it, because it's not, sometimes you need like an excavator. That can be quite costly. Sometimes you need stuff like, as I said, like pond liners and so, but all that costs money. So I'll go out and approach organizations that I know fund things like that, and get 1,000 euros here, 1,000 euros there. If a municipality is involved, they will give me like some like labor power also, like people from the local government or whatever, like helping me out, and things like that. There's a lot of volunteer work involved, and just trying to connect with people. And the other side of it, I think, so this is very much like the hands-on kind of like going out and doing it side of things, but also you need to educate sort of like people, and I think that's so like what I've done in the past is like I've taking school classes to some of the projects, explaining things. We've put up like information tables, things like that, leaflets. There's a lot. I mean, and as I said, like all of it costs money, but it's actually, it's not huge amounts of money, and you can sort of, get that through organizations. Like I'm a member of the Austrian Herpetologist Society, for instance. Like they're headquartered at the Natural History Museum, and so they have like sort of like a project or sort of like a funding line that they do where they will fund projects like mine, for instance. So
it sounds like the digging the pond is actually the smallest part of the work, or it's about financing and the permits, getting everything in order to actually start building the pond, isn't it?
Right. Of course, if you're lucky and you have access to, like private property where you have an in with the owner, like I do with my parents, for instance, right? I created a bunch of like ponds on their property, which have been like in terms of like amphibian reproduction have been key to sort of propping up populations of certain endangered amphibians there, like in the area. So it's it doesn't have. That's one of the things that I think it's just important to realize is that it doesn't always have to be like a big project. Like sometimes very small projects can have huge knock-on effects, because a lot of amphibians are actually quite like versatile in terms of their like land habitats, as long as they have somewhere to spawn, and again, that needs to be like a small body of water, ideally, no fish, and that's usually it. That's all it takes very often, and so it really makes a difference. So I have to, of course, I'm documenting all of that, and I have some pretty, I think, astonishing success stories to report. And it's just basically if you're kind of like single-handedly bring back like a species from like the brink of like local extinction to being sort of almost commonplace again, that's, I think that's quite a, that's what keeps them going, really, because you see immediately like the next year you do something, the next year you can already like see some of the the work paying off.
We might come back to your success stories in a bit, but I would be very interesting in knowing how you work with people and what is your not expectation, but what is your experience there? Because you said that it's very important to connect with people, to educate people, and also somehow maybe to get the message across. How do you feel, or how do you see that people in whatever level, even in local government or local public administration or private owners of the land, have an understanding for the value of these habitats and for your work?
You kind of, it always depends on who you talk to. You kind of have to like change your approach a little, right? So when it comes to like local politics, like that's a, even in the countryside, that's a different animal altogether, because you have to get to realize like projects that are a little more expensive maybe, or you have to get everyone on board. So of course you usually get like the Green Party representatives or whatever, like you get those on board quite easily, but that almost immediately sort of results in a knee-jerk reaction from say the Conservative Party or the in Austria the Freedom Party, for instance, right, the far right party. But you kind of also need those guys, sign off on it, depending on sort of like the political situation in the community. And you have to sort of like find a way to talk to everybody that isn't like, you don't want to be like talking down, because you have the moral high ground, of course. That's it's just for starters, but also there's just a lot of explaining you have to do that you don't want to come off, as I said, as sort of someone coming in from the outside and now explaining everything to them. It's like, okay, this is you talk to people. Do you remember like when you were a kid and you would go to like into the forest and you'd hear frogs? You don't hear them anymore, right? And there's something we can do about that right here. We can sort of like bring that back, and so you kind of like have to address it on a very, very personal level sometimes. And that's, and I know that works. And for a lot of people, they don't necessarily care, but they also don't necessarily have anything against what you're doing, right? And they're like, oh well, it's good. And even down to like finances, like for instance, for a community like a municipality, it's kind of like a project like having like creating sort of like a little ecosystem somewhere for endangered amphibians. That's something to like even brag about. That's something, right? And like my work is like 100% like volunteer work, right? So I don't get paid for it. And it's like, and so I remember like for one like conservative member of sort of like the local municipality, like one of the big selling points is like, oh, we're never going to get anything that cheap ever. So let's sign off on it,
Yeah,
So
they just exploit your label then somehow in one way or the other.
in a way, but of course, like they're not the beneficiaries, so like because obviously I'm doing it for the animals and for wildlife. So, but you have to sort of find ways to present the idea and the concept that's relatable.
Yeah,
to people.
And you probably also have to show in some way the added value for the community, what is in there for them. As you said, that it's important to not come from the outside into a community or municipality and just say, hey, this is important, we need to do that. But you need to somehow find allies and find the common ground, and make other communities understand why it's valuable for them in their community.
Right. And like projects that are near sort of like human dwellings, if you will, you'll get quite a bit of traffic there, right? People are going on walks, and they will see what's going on. So it's very important to provide information as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done so with, as I said, like big sort of like information like tables where you'd read up on you can read up on sort of like the history of it, why sort of like why are these things important, what's the added value, it's like, okay, because that's something you kind of like, I mean, to people who are like involved in things like that, it's kind of like obvious, but for a lot of people it's not. It's that okay, you may not care about like frogs and toads or whatever, you may even maybe you don't even like them, but you may like the animal that's next up in the food chain, right? That depends on those animals. You may like the fact that like a single toad eats like a whole like a big sort of like garbage trash can full of insects like every year, right? Like a single one. You have like I don't know, a dozen in your garden or whatever, right? Like that obviously makes a difference if you like gardening, right?
Yeah, because
they eat like slugs, they eat all kinds of like bugs and creepy crawlies that you may not want, right? So I guess the food chain argument is very often quite convincing to people. It's like, okay,
and it connects again to the educational aspect, right? Because you might not know that the little toad in your garden feeds on so much insects, which might be annoying to you.
Right, right. I mean, it's even or just like the larvae of newts, for instance, as they're like developing like in the water, they live almost exclusively off of mosquito larvae,
Mhm.
right? And they empty the pond of them,
Mhm.
right? There's just none of them left, and it's like, yeah, obviously there's an added value here, right?
Yeah.
Of course, you could just go and poison everything, right? But we know about the knock-on effects of that, like that it's not the 50s or 60s anymore. We kind of like we've learned, right? And yeah, I think that's just creates a sense of awareness, maybe, that like helps people like me, us, to like realize projects like that, to implement them, but also kind of on, it's as I said, it's like educational, and um you want to also talk to kids and children who very often have a natural fascination with water
Mhm.
and nature and things like that. And I think that's a good, it's easier with them, than sort of like the old guys never thought about that,
Yeah,
for
but it's
all his
fascinating
life.
because it with your project, and you also said that a small project can have a huge impact, or you put it in different words, but it's so interesting because I think that these projects are very well placed to create an understanding that humankind are part of nature, and as you said,
Right.
that we cannot or should not just go back to times in 50s, 60s, and it's still done today, to poison everything to get, for example, insects out. But there might be, nature might provide us with better solutions to deal with this. With this. But coming
Of
back
course.
to our main topic, toads, frogs, what else? Salamanders and
Newts.
newts.
So those
Yes.
those are the four main sort of like categories in terms of like what we have in the amphibian kingdom,
Yeah, not to
if you
exclude
will.
anyone. To be, yeah.
Right. Those are
So,
the four. Yeah.
yeah. So when we went out for a bike ride to visit all those people, let's say in Vienna, we visited the Nordbahnviertel, which is a neighborhood where recently a huge brownfield, so an old train yard, was redeveloped towards a new neighborhood for living and working, and it's one of the biggest redevelopment project in Vienna, in central Vienna, going on at the moment or of the last 10 years. And it was one of these,
Mm.
um, yeah, in between all these buildings, we went to a number of artificial pools right in the middle of this development, which is very densely built, and it was in the park. And although it was never foreseen, as far as I know, for improving the biodiversity in the area, these pools became the favorite breeding ground for the green toad, so, which is a highly endangered species. Can you
In
describe a
Austria, for
little
sure. Yeah.
bit? Can you describe a little bit how the toad ended up there in these basins? What is your knowledge on that, and why they provide such a good habitat in this densely populated urban area?
Yeah, it's fascinating. And it's been studied quite a bit, by the Boku University in Vienna, and people like that. It's very interesting. I mean, the thing about it, let's go back to like the very very start of your question, where you said, like, I mean, the term brownfield kind of implies, I think it's contrasted, it's in contrast to, or constant distinction to greenfield. Is that right? Right. So kind of like brownfield kind of implies like, okay, there's not much going on.
Yeah,
And
brownfield is a post-industrial site.
exactly. So and I guess like an old sort of, um what was it, like a big sort of industrial train station kind of thing, right? Like that's what it was.
Right.
um those areas are very often, the lifeblood, you could say, of specialist species, right? There's a lot of animals that specialize in particular like environments. They need those for survival because those will be You know, maybe there are not as many predators there, things like that. And what we see with the green toads in Vienna, but also in Munich and things like that, is that what happened over the past like centuries, say, is that the natural habitats of those amphibians were destroyed because they used to live in sort of like around like big natural rivers in the areas where the rivers would flood, and they would use those little basins, those little like pools of water that would, stay back or would remain once the water retreated, as like for spawning, because they could be sure that there won't be any like predators in there. There's no competition, right? So they specialized in that. Almost all of that got destroyed. But they found like similar habitats in what is now called brownfield areas, industrial areas in the city, which are in many ways quite similar to their natural environment, in that they're very, they're usually kind of like dry, and there's not much vegetation there, like open sort of like fields, rocky, kind of dusty areas. Sand, is very important because they like to bury themselves sort of a little, and things like that. And you find that brownfields, but also in quarries, gravel quarries in particular. Like those are very important habitats. Now, those areas are kind of like dynamic. They're they're in many ways ideal. So the thing is, of course, brownfield, as I said, doesn't sound like much. So, of course we can build on there, but people tend to forget that, somebody already lives there, right? And that's been mostly neglected in the 20th century, and I guess like up until recently. Whereas now, with new developments, these things are usually taken into account. So what happens usually is either you create an alternative habitat somewhere else, and that is either accessible to the animals in terms of like it being just right next door, for instance, right? But that very often, so for instance, like in Vienna, like in central Vienna, that doesn't work because there's no space. So the third option is to create something like that further out. You try to collect all the animals like in a given area and move them, right? Which is not an ideal solution, because that means, well, we never get all of them. Also, you kind of like isolate them even more, right? Which is one of the big problems, is like isolation in terms of like the sort of like draining the gene pool and things like that. So that's going on. And that's what you were just referring to, you kind of try and accommodate their needs in what you're building. So I don't know how far like the those little like pools that you mentioned were sort of like designed for that purpose, because they're not ideal. Surely, like they have like sharp like metal edges, which means that the little hatchlings, if you will, like they can't really they have trouble leaving the water and very often drown. So they're not ideal. It's not a problem for the like adult individuals. They can hop in and out, very easily. But it's in many ways it's not ideal. There's like tarmac around it that gets very, very hot in the summer. The animals like burn up on the hot tarmac, dry out and die and things like that. Nevertheless, it seems that in that particular situation, the population of green toads has actually grown, and which you wouldn't suspect, because you saw the park. It's not very natural looking. It's sort of like, you have like a playground, and you have a lot of tarmac. Actually, you have I think there's like a basketball court and tennis court and stuff like that. Very little.
And there's not so
vegetation.
many bushes around
Right.
around the poles.
It's a complete heat trap also.
Yeah.
It's just really, but in that case, the green toads love all that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need vegetation. They prefer it if they have a clear view of their surroundings. They're specialized,
Mm-hmm.
right? And as I said, like those kinds of habitats have mostly been destroyed, like out in the countryside, and so these animals found refuge in some of our big cities. Munich is very similar like that. There's areas where where green toads still live, and they'll be the dominant species there, especially gravel quarries. Those are, those are the main areas for that. But now what happens? That's sort of my big concern. I mentioned this to you when we're there. Now what happens is, I guess in Munich, Vienna, places like that, what you see is redensification as a sort of like as a way to maximize sort of the capacity of our cities in terms of, because more and more people are moving into the cities, so you need more housing. There's like a housing crisis, blah blah blah. There's of course a ton of reasons for that, but of course the re-densification means that you lose a lot of those brownfields. You lose a lot of those like natural habitats within cities, which by the way also play a role in like carbon sequestration and things like that. So it's not like they're not useless, but you lose a lot of them because you want to build more densely.
Right, and that links so well to an earlier discussion I had on the podcast with Josephine Rangel, who also said we need to reconsider or stop densifying our cities because we need to somehow find the balance between accommodating more people in the city. She didn't say that, so I'm paraphrasing, but accommodating more people in the city and destroying or reusing other land types, if you will, like the brownfields and so on. So if we want to have a future where nature plays an essential role in the city, or an important role, and I think this is the way to go, to be honest, reconsidering this densification activities and is a very important part. Because also when we were there on the bike ride and you showed me around this habitat around the poles, and showed me, it is this very central spot in this new development. And then he said, hey, over there is another habitat at the end of the road here. And that is like 200 meters from the pools. But, it is like, there are some green pockets in there, but it is basically an asphalt desert. So how should toads go over a 200-meter long street to go from one habitat to another one? And there's also a tram stop currently being built in it. So it also, while
those two habitats, those two, just typically those two habitats used to be connected, right? And now they're not anymore, which means both populations, it's very different. It's not, I wouldn't say it's like completely impossible for them to traverse it. Like individual toads might, but it's very, very dangerous and probably doesn't work. And it doesn't work to an extent where the two populations could exchange like their genes on a larger scale, which is important because otherwise you're kind of like just draining the gene pool, and that leads to, like in the long term, leads to that population going extinct or die out.
But just for me personally, having this perspective from this new development or from one habitat to another, it allows allowed me to have a non-human perspective on how I perceive the urban world around me, which was very interesting. Because if I would have not known about the toad and about the habitat here and one habitat there, I would not have this perspective of, that this street cuts through, as you just described it, a gene pool, and comes with all these challenges. In what way does urbanism have to change to plan and activate these complex connections between species, so between human and non-human?
Well, I think as you just said, you have to take different perspectives into account. Um, like we're, of course, cities are built by humans for humans, right? I mean, that's why we have cities. But that doesn't mean that we're the only ones inhabiting those cities. And I think it's only fair to also take those other perspectives into account. As you said, you can have things like, you have like more and more houses have like green roofs, where they have like trees and stuff on there. And it's all very well. It's great for birds and stuff like that. But if you can't fly, like that's no good for you, right? That's not going to help. So and you have to sort of like sometimes take the perspective of like a very slow moving um, ground dwelling animal that, as amphibians do have like need moisture, because they don't really drink, they just absorb like moisture through the air and like and by sitting in puddles of water. Um, and things like that. And so, like, and then you say, okay, like for me, it's like very easy to get from here to there. I can just walk it, then I like go, I don't know, cross the road. Like they don't know what roads are, it's just like a death trap. Like every year, like millions and millions of toads die on our roads just needlessly.
Mm.
Because there are ways. It just costs money, but there are ways to like prevent that completely,
Mm.
by building tunnels and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very important perspective. And so like with the in terms of like urbanism, of course, like people are going to live in urban centers, but you kind of have to sort of also take into account like how people naturally like live, right? And naturally, like in both senses of the word, in terms like, you know, as part of their nature, like what sort of like what,
We're the debate is shifting yet again. It's just how things are currently still developed in cities, which might be a bit lacking. But there's so many ambitions on EU level and also on local level to get
mm,
nature back into the city, but go beyond the greenification or
right,
just making cities green. So we go beyond the understanding that green space is a park, but that it can be more with larger scale natural restoration projects and these kind of things. But I think this will also, the debate on regenerative urbanism is taking up fast, and I think this is just the way we will go. I see this development where
right,
10 years ago there was a lot of debate on densification. We need to do this
mm,
because we need to cut CO2 and everything is close by. But you know with urbanism, it's always this dilemmas that it's so complex. When you turn one screw, when you turn screw A, there will be effects on screw B, C to Z, and finding a balance on that is relevant. Gerfried, you
yeah,
mentioned previously your success stories with your work with amphibians, and I think one of them is probably an award you won for biodiversity by the province of Styria in Austria for a project you worked
last
on
year last year I
last
did,
year,
yeah.
just outside of Graz in a more suburban situation. Do you want to tell
Right.
us a little bit about that and your other success stories?
This project, and which I won an award for, and which is basically like my initiative that I got a bunch of people involved in, and sort of on the level of the municipality and like farmers, uh you know the road maintenance organization, like
Yeah.
there's all kinds of like things. So and those were like three distinct, like it's one project, but like three distinct like sub projects that I did in sort of like the neighborhood where I grew up. So which is, so if you have like a personal connection to like the place you're doing things in, I think that just makes it easier in terms of like talking to people and getting the ball rolling a little. So that worked. But yeah, I was able to do what I had set out to do, like, and more, like actually like, I exceeded my expectations in what was possible. Every, Everything happened within not even a year, like 8 months, which is unheard of. If you have like that many like parties to get on board, and there's politics and like stuff like that. Usually, stuff like that takes like can take years, right? To implement, to realize. I think it must be like over a dozen like species that are like on the like list of endangered species, just there, right? So it's like a center for that, really. Um, and the other two projects were that were part of the bigger projects were like with the municipality. Like um, there was a pond like near a forest that we drained and got all the goldfish out and built like three more ponds of different sizes around it. So you have like a four pond, and I think I'm gonna add a fifth one like next year. The interesting thing about that actually is that the area like where that is only exists because of a tunnel they built like underneath it, and the ventilation shaft and emergency sort of like escape shaft of the tunnel is right there. And so they had to have like an area like where there couldn't be like any trees, where nothing could be built on, for helicopters to land on in case of an emergency. The tunnel is only 1 kilometer long. I don't think there's ever been like an accident in there. But that meant that this area was sort of not usable for anything else, right? And that kind of like made it easier. So it was kind of like actually, so the tunnel was kind of like a blessing in disguise in that sense. There was like a silver lining to it. That's one project. That project has been important also because it's like walking distance from some of the main like schools down in that small town. There's a bunch of schools down there actually, and so for their like biology classes, like teachers will bring students to like the ponds up there, and they're very accessible, which is both a blessing and a curse. It's good because the kids can like see things close up. They will like fish around in it like with the little nets a little, and and study like whatever they found. Of course, one of the big problems there is that a lot of people just let their dogs like swim in it, and that can cause problems. But on the educational side of things, like it's perfectly positioned because it's a lot of people like go for walks there, and it's not far from like local schools, and then the schools now has their own like pond, because they were kind of like inspired, and like and especially with kids, it's like they see something like that, they go home, they may live like in a house with a garden, and they're like, Mom, Dad, can I have a pond, which is like how it started for me, really. So
Yeah.
you get that. And the third part of it is sort of like on farmland, where like there's like a wet area, like where there used to be a pond, which had dried up, and I got permission to like use part of the area to just dig it up, and it filled with water very quickly, and now there's like a nice little pond there that's used by a number of species to procreate. It's cool, and you see the effects like almost immediately.
Yeah.
It's like the first so we built all these things like in the fall of 2000, or like 2021, fall winter 2021. So the next spring, you already had like you already saw that like some animals using it, and like the year after, like this year, you could already see that like the number of individuals has gone up, because
That's yeah.
they have like, I mean, for toads it takes a little longer. It takes like 3 to 5 years until you like see a difference, because they only become like sexually active at that time, right? Sort of like they live much longer actually than most people think, because like, you know, a toad's lifespan, if they're, you know, if nothing happens, like it's up to like 20, 25 years.
Oh, wow.
So they can live, you know, of course it's a dangerous world out there, and
Yeah.
if you have to cross a road, then you know the
Yeah.
life expectancy drops dramatically.
Yeah.
But you know they live or can live for quite a while, so which means that they only hit like puberty like after like 3 years or
Yeah.
whatever. So you know, it takes a couple of years to see a difference, or see an effect. But like with a lot of frogs, it can just be the next year or the year after that you already see like an increase like in the number of individuals that participate in like the spawning activity.
Yeah.
That's how you can like measure it, and you know, you start hearing them more, because you know, especially with the European tree frog, which you know just didn't exist anymore. There were like one or two individuals left, like in that area. It's literally back to where it was. I want to say like 20, 30 years ago, right?
That's
Before
amazing.
before a lot of you know the negative sort of
Yeah.
things happened. You can do fairly small, not too expensive things, and they can have a very noticeable effect in quite a short time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I find that so inspiring. Also, when you described that you implemented or worked on this project only for 8 months and got that going, and it also shows something we talk in urbanism sometimes, that what is really needed is someone spanning boundaries, linking people, linking different knowledges, linking different activities in one direction, and just try to get things going, really. And I think that is what you just described here.
yeah, it's similar to you know what the political philosopher Edmund Burke in when was that, like in the 1800s I think, referred to as like the little platoons, which is groups of people that get together and organize and sort of like span the distance between like local community-based like concerns and initiatives and government, right? So that's you know where you kind of start from a certain thing you care about locally, communally, right? And then sort of like and it's sort of like a bottom-up approach rather than like a top-down approach. Of course, you need sort of like the top-down like politics too, for like finance and you know like things like that for funding. But it kind of like very often starts at the bottom and builds its way up, and you get people together. It's just like, hey, well, you know, and to see initiatives like that in the environmental movement quite a bit.
I would be very interesting to,
Yeah.
not that it's important, but it links to a discussion which I had recently. Would you actually describe yourself as an activist?
No, I think it's an overused word. Actually, just read this recently. There's a quote by one of my favorite authors, Thomas Sowell, and it goes like this: "Activism is a way for useless people to feel important." So which is you know sort of like the kind of like virtue signaling aspect of activism. Well, you know, I'm an activist. It's sort of like an identity more than trying to be useful, right? In useful to you know the community, useful to nature even, right? So I don't use the term.
That's
I think
fine.
I think it's tainted a little.
Yeah,
you know.
we should have a different a discussion in another point on that, because I for me, if how I would see activists work, you would fall exactly in that. You dedicate your own time, your own free time, to a cause you find important for a greater societal good.
Right. I just don't like the label.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that, and maybe we could call it that, but I think it's a label that carries certain connotations that are not necessarily conducive to what I just said earlier, presenting the ideas to the general public in a way that makes them relatable.
Mm-hmm. Might also be different in different contexts, geographical contexts. I think an activist might be something different or understood differently in Europe, in North America, in Latin America. I think these are very different contexts where you could see that.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. How do you see your work in a greater picture, given the urgency at the moment to transform urban areas in times of rapidly declining biodiversity and increasing climate crisis and all the other crises we have around?
Well, it feels like that there is now, or has been, like a shift in attitude in that sense. As you mentioned earlier, things that were sort of like kind of like controversial decades ago are now kind of like common sense, almost, or commonplace, where they're just being considered, at least. It's like, okay, I don't think anyone, like in the 70s, if you said, well, we can't build here because there's like toads, would have taken you seriously. But now we live in a society where that is something you have to take into account. If you want to build somewhere, you have to like make sure you either sort of like build around the natural habitat, or create some alternatives for it. And I think there's been obviously like a massive shift in that, and in terms of attitude. But of course, there could be a little bit of bias in there, like in that estimation of mine, because obviously I tend to socialize with people who are open to that. But of course, if you just step out and see what people are actually doing, and where there's there's even a lot of resistance to things sometimes, right? Then see
of course, but your examples or your work, I find it shows alternatives to all that status quo, and eventually people will jump on it. You described that by when children go to the pond. Actually, just how you got into this work and amphibians when you were a child, that you experience what is out there near a pond, or experience the value of it, and show an alternative, that this alternative has value. And it's not opposing, or not only opposing other developments, but it shows that there might be a better way to do things.
No, absolutely, because we're always going to have cities, right? We're always going to, of course, there's some predictions of potential population collapse, especially like in the West, but also like in places like China and things like that.
Yeah, that will take another 80 years.
But as it now stands, I think the trajectory is more one of growth, right? Yeah. So there's going to be like more people moving into the cities. There's all kinds of connected issues to that, immigration, things like that, of course. But we're always going to have cities, and I think the idea has to be that it's kind of, we have to. I mean, it sounds like we're going back to something, but it's actually, it just makes sense to see how we can have like natural habitats and human dwellings like in the same place, rather than having them like this. Okay, this is nature. This is where humans live. Right.
Absolutely.
So rather than having those,
and that comes to with a mindset that humans are part of nature, I find, because then you also start developing as such, not as opposing bipolar situations where you have humans on the one side and nature on the other side, and especially on the urbanist, where in an urban setting, I think this is a thought experiment which is very interesting to do. How do we build cities in that way, with this very close connections? And there are some examples, and there is increasingly projects going in that direction. But this mind shift is still to be done, especially in Western Europe or in the global North. I
No,
find.
of course, of course. I mean, and well, I mean, I think we're actually a little further down the line than if you then like go to, I don't know, like China or developing countries. I think there's, I mean, they're obviously like in their development like further further back in terms of even considering things like that, because if you want to sort of like raise your population out of poverty, and like that takes just a ton of energy, you're probably not going to think about like toads a lot, right? So I think it's sort of like a byproduct of the kind of like prosperity that's been created, in the West through certain means, to have the
No,
luxury of.
I will
It
probably
is
cut.
because, yeah, I mean, feel free to like challenge me on that, but just to have um, the luxury of not having to think about um, your own survival in terms of like fending off nature anymore, right? Or like extracting as much from nature as you can and just not care about it, because there's this way to do things now that don't necessitate that, and you don't have to worry about freezing to death in the winter, starving, things like that. So I think that's I mean that's a known fact. Sort of like the areas of like nature reserves go up in direct proportion to prosperity. I think that's a known fact. So there's still a lot of work to do, of course, right? And I think there's a lot of it can be done through, especially when it comes to like carbon emissions, stuff like that. I think the market does provide certain mechanisms that facilitate that. But there is such a thing as, that probably familiar with the tragedy of the commons. Is that
Yeah.
right? So it's like you kind of need institutions to regulate things like that, because everybody's trying to work for their
Well,
own benefit.
it depends on how you, especially how you run your economy and what you value in your economy. If you only measure your economy in stupid GDP growth per capita, that doesn't tell you anything. It's just statistical data, and it doesn't value any of the planetary boundaries. So you cannot.
Right,
It's
right.
just a very very stupid way of measuring the economy, which is built on exploiting natural resources, and that is not what is.
No, and
You
you
need
have
to
to,
value
yeah.
other things and factors of the natural world in how you
So
do
the thing
your
the thing
economy.
that's the thing that's not taken into account in that like a GDP based model and things like that are of course externalities that are not being, like, they're not factored in, right? Because there's stuff, okay, like we have like a GDP growth of so and so
But
much.
calling it an externality is already basically wrong, because we live in a
Well, yeah, I
natural
mean,
world. It's not an externality
right,
if you
and I'm with you. I'm totally with you on that. I'm just using the general expression that's being used in that case. In that there's like potential third parties, like animals, like future generations, even, that have to pay for those, right? Externalities. But of course, and I think this is something we can definitely agree on. The core, the key to everything is the realization that we're part of nature. Like that is really, and that's not like nature worship, like pagan style nature worship or whatever. And it's not, like some hippy dippy like nonsense. It's just the fact of life that we're organic biological creatures who depend on nature, but are also like subject to its laws. And we're hurting ourselves. I mean, that's the the bottom line there. And it may not seem like we are, like, short term, but of course we see that many of the things that we did just decades ago have horrendous consequences now. Flooding,
Right.
like that's,
Yeah.
straighten out all the rivers, things like that, and build very close to them. And now, suddenly there's like more water.
Yeah.
We're fucked, right? So, it's these kinds of things.
Right. What a fitting statement for closing this episode of Cities Reimagined. We continued the discussion, or the talk we had, a little bit more, and talked about his background in punk and hardcore and how it was to tour Belarus 20 years ago, and all these kind of stories. You will find them in a bonus episode posted very soon. Yeah, that was all for this week's Cities Reimagined podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, I would be very happy if you would leave a comment or a review or a rating on the podcasting platform you are using, or you reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you send me an email at johannes@anthropocene.city. We also have Instagram, so get connected there too for background stories. If you're into harder kind of music size, here is a song of Gerfried's London-based band Morrow called To the Fold from their 2022 record Acquired Earth. Expect some serious unfolding of music right there, including strings and everything. That's it for today, and I hope to catch you soon.